there's been a fair amount of criticism of not just you, but of all the other candidates in the race who not named Trump, that they have been too timid in going after the former president for some of his policy mistakes and things where he could be faulted. And the explanation is, well, that they're just afraid to upset Donald Trump and his supporters. So what would you put on the list?
I'd say, for example, shutting down the U.S. Department of Education. It's still here. It's bigger.
He should have done that?
Absolutely should have done it.
But he shut down the whole government during COVID. He shut down the economy during COVID. How about that?
I actually think that's a perfectly legitimate, in a different sense of the word shutdown. You're playing on the word here. This would say shut down and don't come back and don't spend the money. There you shut it down and still spend the money and then it came back, right? And so, so both, I think, are legitimate areas for criticism that you've already heard. Maybe you haven't, but on the campaign trail, I've already been vocal about both of those points. I also tell you, we haven't even had the first debate. If I had one area that I've been most pointed in my criticism of Trump, I don't want to preliminarily criticize him if he does. I mean, I expect him to show up on the debate stage. I do. I think it would be a mistake for him, for the country, for the Republican Party, if he didn't. But if he does not, you will see me unrestrained in my criticism of even that, and the cultural tone that it says for our movement as a party that wants to be the best version of ourselves, that preaches the merits of free speech. I'm not protecting anyone from criticism. I think a big part of what you've seen from me, and I hope you're going to continue to see from me, is a focus on the what and the why. What do we stand for and why do we stand for it, rather than obsessing over the question of the who, which is, I think, a mistake the Republican Party too often makes. Ronna McDaniel or somebody else, Kevin McCarthy or somebody else, and then you get the presidential context, Donald Trump or somebody else. What I want to do in this race is I want to be the person this year who leads the way in defining the what and the why. What do we stand for? Why do we stand for it? And it is my expectation and hope that next year the voters will reward the person who actually led the way. And part of the case that I make, and I say this to grassroots audiences, is that I think America First is a broad label to apply, but I assume that mantle proudly. America First does not belong to Donald Trump. Doesn't belong to Ron DeSantis. It didn't belong to Ronald Reagan when he said the same thing. It doesn't belong to me when I say it either. It belongs to the people of this country. And I think I will go further with that agenda, America First principles, than Donald Trump did, because we're doing it based on first principles and moral authority, not just vengeance and grievance. And so the contrasts that I'll be drawing from Trump are not going to be just limited to policy. I think some of the most important contrasts relate to actually the method of leadership and manner of leadership and motivation, grounded in principles and moral foundations, rather than on vengeance and grievance. I think that might be the biggest contrast of all, actually. And so I'm not afraid to draw policy contrasts, but if you're asking me what contrasts I'm going to draw most in the case that I make to the voter, it's actually probably going to be more the latter.
Well, just in terms of the practical challenges of running for the Republican nomination, you're going to have, looks like now, Ron DeSantis is going to get in, Tim Scott's getting in, Mike Pence aiming to get in addition to Nikki Haley, and so on. And the argument is, and with yourself, and the argument is from people who say, well, they're not going after Trump. They're going to kill each other because they're all vying to be the last man or woman standing against Trump, or at least in the initial stage, maybe the third person standing against DeSantis and Trump. And Trump's going to get a free ride because these guys are all afraid of taking on MAGA and his voters.
I think that that's a little bit of political and analytical hubris there, right? To sort of think that that is the right framework that you're supposed to look at this as to how you can find and narrow down the person who is supposed to beat Trump, presume that is the objective, and then think about what machinations you go through to achieve that.
Well, if you want the nomination, you got to beat Trump.
I think we're far too early to have enough hubris to know that this is exactly how things are going to play out over the course of the next 12 months, versus taking the approach that I'm taking, which is to say, speak truth, do it unapologetically, trust the voters. I think that there's going to be an organic element to this where, you know, I think one of the things that's different about me is I am the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. I think that positions me uniquely to reach the next generation of Americans. I think I am uniquely focused on substance and what drives us to the future rather than litigating past grievances. And I think that those are unique elements that I think over the course of a year, not instantly today, but when we're talking about the Iowa caucuses next year, the New Hampshire primary, looking into the path between then and Super Tuesday, I think by then I'm in this race because I believe I'll be best positioned to not only draw a contrast from Trump, but the more important part is actually win the trust of the entire Republican primary electorate, including the MAGA base, including the Trump base, to say that this is how we take the America First agenda to the next level, not just running from something. And that running from something can take many forms, Paul. It could be running from wokeism, running from transgenderism, running from climatism. For some in the Republican Party, running from Trump. Part of my pitch is I'm not running from something. I'm running to something, a vision of what the conservative movement ought to stand for. If the left will talk about race, gender, sexuality, and climate, I'm talking about reviving the idea, the vision of the individual. What does it mean to be an individual rather than a member of a identity-based group? What does it mean to be a member of a family? We're not just against big government. We are also for the best known form of governance known to mankind, which is the nuclear family, without apologizing for it. Reviving patriotism, conviction in the nation. And yes, for me, I am religious. I believe we are one nation under God. I think turning God into a four-letter word has been bad for our culture and I think bad for the American way of life. I'm less concerned with attacking candidate X or candidate Y. I'm going to be doing less of that with respect to Trump or with respect to other candidates than traditional politicians may. I'm focused on what are we running to? And my bet is not in day one when people haven't even heard of me yet, but by the time we get to January or February or March of next year, that this will be where the demand of the electorate actually is, which is different than where I think the heart was of the Republican base in 2015 or 2016, which was oriented towards vengeance and grievance. My sense of the pulse and my finger on the pulse is quite a bit different in what I see. And I think that if we're skating to where the puck is going, that's where I'm going to be.